help us with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Forget the pledge.
Roll call, please.
Supervisor Fisher?
Yes.
Clerk Newbeck here. Treasurer Lockren?
Here.
Trustee Aliaga?
Here.
Trustee Brown?
Here.
Trustee Nalamothu?
Here.
And Trustee Ritchie.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And you have with your agenda materials a proposed agenda. Are there any additions or deletions, or is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented.
Support.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? Not all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Any announcements? First, any board announcements? Carrie?
Absentee ballots for the August 2nd election were sent to the post office today. We mailed 5,188 applications. Those are for people that, for the most part, are on our permanent absentee list. So.
Okay. Any other board announcements? Any announcements in the audience? Is there anybody online? Do we know? I can't see. Is there somebody on? Okay. Does our guest online have an announcement? Hearing none. Public comment. Any public comment on matters that are not on the agenda? You have 5 minutes if you'd like to come to the podium and.
Yes.
Okay, please come to the podium and state your name.
Great. My name is Mitch Bernhardt. I've been a homeowner here in Independence Township for now since 2013, so going on 9 years now, and obviously a taxpayer since then.
Thank you. Can you state your address, please? I'm sorry.
Sure. So Mitchell Bernhardt, 6360 Woodcrest Ridge.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I come before you today to talk of a disappointment I have in the support we've received from the board. So far, we've been going through something for about a year. Neighbors have moved in to our neighborhood who are renters, which in its own sense is not a problem at all. We've had renters there before, and they've always been fantastic people. The problem is they cut down the trees in our backyard, portion of those being my trees, and in doing so, and using their words on Facebook, not mine, cutting down trees to create a dirt bike track in our neighborhood caused significant damage to my neighbors and my property in the form of water trespass. So a ton of water accumulated. It blew out a retaining wall. It destroyed my kid's play set. It decimated my neighbor's house, who was at the bottom of the hill. And we sought your support in addressing this in a timely and responsible manner. We didn't want any problem. We just wanted the water trespass issue resolved so no further damages were incurred on our behalf. Unfortunately, that is not what we got. Through multiple attempts, we've actually had and dealt with 3 members of the township. I will state him as employee number 1. Came after talking with us. He stated clearly this was an obvious case of trespass, water trespass, and wanted to support us. He quickly rebutted himself and then said, you know what, I don't see any case of trees being cut down, which is preposterous. And after speaking with the homeowners, they are only utilizing pedal bikes. After sharing with him videos of side-by-sides, dirt bikes, ATVs with friends of adults riding them, that was quickly walked back. Unfortunately, no support was given. We then addressed it with his supervisor. Same exact thing started. Yes, this seems clear to me. Came out, looked at it, had a fantastic conversation. Unfortunately, no follow-up was supported. Then Jerry and we came to you for support, and it was very positive at first. You were very receptive to the concerns that we had. Unfortunately, after time went by and Comments were made to the homeowner, the actual homeowner. Nothing was solved. And in fact, we were warned here today that if, after not receiving any update from you for about a month now, no communication, and it's been about a year since the water trespass happened. We've already had to deal with the problem on our own. Still nothing has been done, and Jerry, I come to you disappointed that we were asked not to come to this board meeting, not to address this issue with you. And this was coming from the multiple people who were in correspondence with you. I'm disappointed. We deserve better as a community, as neighbors, especially since our home property values are deteriorating as a result. And frankly, my pocketbook, my immediate pocketbook, to resolve it. This is something that needs to be corrected. Every single neighbor I have who has been impacted by this is saddened. This is a small community. We deserve better. Please give us your support moving forward and make right on holding accountable the problems and the solutions by the homeowner. Thank you.
Okay. With the board's indulgence, I'd be happy to comment on this. This is a situation that I inherited, of course, and the determination that was made when I came in was that this was a private dispute between individuals, property owners, and not a township matter. And so I wanted to do whatever I could to try to help. And so I investigated it. In fact, I went out to the property and took a look at it and tried to formulate some basis where the township could possibly be involved. And I then began a correspondence with the property owner who is out of state. And that property owner disagreed that these were any kind of serious ATVs or anything like that. And I got a video showing that they were ATVs that were riding around in an area where vegetation had been removed. And it appeared to me, my conclusion was that because the vegetation had been removed and the ATVs were riding on it, and this property is quite a slope. It's probably a slope of, I'm going to say 20 feet down from where the house is down to where these adjoining property owners live. And then coupled with that, during last year, I think we all remember that there were some extraordinary rain events last summer. And not only this situation, but there were a few other situations where there were drainage problems caused by the extraordinary rainfall. But so I began to correspond with the actual homeowner, and there was really a suspicion by the other property owners that I was trying to work with that I would never get a response even. And I did get a response, and they indicated that they would address the problem, and particularly when I sent the actual videos of these ATVs, they never responded again. And so to me, the solution was to bring this matter to the township board, but I could not bring it to the township board on my own without an opinion of legal counsel that we actually had some basis for pursuing this trespass. And so that is where the situation is currently. It is in the hands of Dan Kelly and his firm. And I've asked for an opinion on whether we could handle this in the circuit court or the district court. And I'm waiting for that decision. I'm waiting for that opinion. That's basically where it is. So I've been pursuing it to the degree possible, and my apologies for all the problems you've had. I mean, obviously, it wasn't the township's causing any problems, and so I'm just sorry you had to endure it. And your next door neighbor had an equal or greater problem with their basement and so forth, And they've now spent a considerable amount of money installing a berm along the back area there to stop a repeat situation, but there still should be some solution taken in the event there is another future rain event like that, which, you know, inevitably there will be, if they're still riding these bikes there, matted down the property, bedded down the dirt and all that sort of thing, so that when the water came down this incline, it had nothing to stop it. It wasn't seeping into the ground like often would be if there was vegetation, and vegetation would have slowed it down and all that sort of thing. It just came whooshing down as if it was like a pipe, in my opinion, into these backyards. So that, you know, that's a problem, and I'm hoping that there's something we can do about it.
Great. Thank you. All we ask is communication, because we've been left in the dark. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking it seriously. And yeah, any support we can give.
I didn't write down your address again. I was wondering if you could tell us what it was again, just so I know the area again.
Of course. 6360 Woodcrest Ridge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here,
I do
yes,
believe
here.
part of the problem may have been with some of the lack of communication is possibly some of the employees that you dealt with, because I remembered hearing of this quite some time ago. We've had some turnover with employees as well. So I think some of the employees that you may have been dealing with early on are no longer here, and how that got transferred over, I don't know, but that may also be into play in here as well. So
Yeah, and I
just thought
agree.
it was important that you might know that, so.
Yep, and we know
that-
Jerry inherited that, and it was already problematic from the get-go. From the first two employees, unfortunately, it was a lot of a little left, little right, and then ignoring, which I think is inappropriate. And then so I'm happy to hear that progress is being made. All we want is for our home property values to maintain and for any problem to be solved, and we want nothing more. Thank you. Any more questions? Great.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Jerry, just a
Yeah.
quick question. So who's gonna follow up with Mr. Berger?
Well,
From
as
the
soon as
township?
I hear from the Kelly firm,
Oh,
I will
okay,
follow up.
Kelly, okay,
Yeah.
you will follow up. Okay.
Sure.
All right.
No other public comment? Any public comments from online? All right, now we have both a public hearing and a presentation today. The public hearing is on the agenda first, I'm sorry to say, so you'll have an opportunity to enjoy the situation. And this is approval of a distribution system improvement, drinking water, state revolving fund, and the adoption of a resolution to put this project in motion if the board sees fit. Yeah. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay,
It's
all
very-
right.
Very timid in clicking the buttons.
So
right there.
at 6:15 this evening, the public hearing is open.
Good evening, everyone. This public hearing is to discuss a project that we have developed to address an issue that we have with PFAS. It's a pretty big topic. It's in the news right now. One of our drinking water production wells in the Clarkston Gardens area, we have detected PFAS in that. We detected it in 2018. At the time it was first detected, we shut it off. We haven't pumped a drop of water into the system since then. So in doing that, we kind of hurt ourselves because we lost approximately 1.4 million gallons of water a day that we have available to us to pump out into the rest of the system. So this project plan is tonight, or public hearing for this project plan, is our solution to address this issue. So just to give you a little background on PFAS, PFAS is I'll try not to say the whole word there. You any good at that, Brian? Sounds like that. Polyfluorocarbonate acid. So essentially what it is, it was used very prevalent in the early 60s, 50s, and 60s for Teflon, firefighting foam. It was everywhere. You know, it was like wonderful. Well, very, very prevalent around military bases because being a veteran myself, fire chief's very aware of it too. We've talked about this. These are for fighting fuel fires. It's like a foam that goes down there and it just smothers fuel fires. So inside that foam is PFAS. So it's very prevalent around military bases. We don't have any military bases here, so the question is, where does it come from? Where did it come from? Well, it was made in so many and used in so many different products over the 30, 40 years. Landfills are a problem. It all went to the landfill. We weren't testing for it then, and we test for it now, and we have it. So the public hearing tonight is going to be to address that plan that we have. And to show you just a little example that I just got this, you guys might not have seen this either. So the EPA, even the EPA is all over it all of a sudden. As of Wednesday of this past week, on June 15th, the EPA dropped its lifetime health advisory fee for PFOS and PFOA to the most, by orders of magnitudes from thresholds the agency has relied on for the past 7 years. So with PFAS contamination, the EPA regulates drinking water standards. So they always had a 70 parts per trillion health advisory for PFAS. They've had that in effect since 2016. June 15th, they lowered it to, the agency now has the compounds are unsafe in the parts per quadrillion level. I've never, in my 30 years of doing water, ever had anything analyzed at parts per quadrillion. So they went from 70 parts per trillion to like 0.002 parts per quadrillion, PPQ, and that, which is it just never heard of that. The labs right now that test for PFAS, they can't even test that low. So the EPA, and it's a health advisory with the EPA, which means it's not a maximum contaminant level, but if they lowered it to that, it's coming. It's fast-tracked big time as far as the federal government's concerned. The state of Michigan has been very proactive, and they actually set drinking water standards in 2020 for PFAS. We are still below that with this Clarkston Gardens well house, but our levels are trending up. It's a matter of time we're just going to lose the well. So this project plan is to how we're going to address that issue throughout the township to put us in a long-term position where the drinking water is going to be safe and no PFAS contamination at all. So tonight I have with us is Brian Bachler, and I have Daniel Hong from DLZ. They are engineers who come up with the project plan. They're going to go through this presentation right here. There's an executive summary plus some slides that kind of give you a visual of what we're looking to do. And with the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, this is the first step in this. If this project moves forward, we're looking at November 23? Yes. Third quarter 2023 funding to do this project. But I want to make it really clear that tonight's project plan and resolution that's later on in the agenda in no way, shape, or form commits us to getting a loan or anything like that. This is just the first step. We have lots of hoops to jump through on this. This is just the first step to make the board aware and have the board and the township acknowledge that yes, we do have this issue, and yes, this is a project plan that we like. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian and Daniel here. If they have any questions and you're going through, these gentlemen are here at Professional Engineers, so they could answer any questions you might have. So, gentlemen?
Can I make a quick comment or question?
Sure.
If you have nothing to even test that low, how did they come up with that amount, that was the safe one, if there's nothing that tests that low? Did they
That's
just
a great question.
pick up a number
Maybe
out of
the EPA
anywhere?
has the super machine or something. It is quite mind-boggling. I've never, ever in my career, I don't know if you gentlemen have seen anything tested in parts per quadrillion. Parts per trillion I thought was, whoa. Most of our contaminants and water quality issues, they're always tested in parts per billion or parts per million. Parts per billion, that's quite a bit. Like one drop into a swimming pool. This is like one drop into, I don't know, Lake Erie. It's really quite, that indicates what they're going for. The EPA is moving in a direction where they're going to have zero tolerance for it. I mean, if there's the slightest detection, you need to do something. And that's going to be filtration and or projects such as this. You're going to have to address it because it is a health issue. Long-term exposure to PFAS, kidney failures, there's some nasty things that they're saying that can happen. Lifetime exposure to it. So, it's kind of like arsenic in a way. If you remember back in the day, arsenic was, the maximum contaminant level for arsenic in drinking water was 50 parts per million. It was that way probably since the 60s or maybe in the early 70s. In the early 2000s, it was changed to 10. It went from 50 to 10. And it kind of threw the water industry up in arms because everybody that was around 30, 20, you know, all of a sudden you could not pump any more water out of that well unless you addressed it. And that's infiltration, big money. We did it, Independence Township did it. We took care of business in 2008, sorry, excuse me. We put filtration into our treatment plants on almost all of them. The one that we have the PFAS in doesn't have any filtration whatsoever in it. So PFAS is, arsenic is easy to filter out, very easy once you put the infrastructure in. PFAS is a different animal. It's very easy to filter out, but the media you use to filter it out, you got to get rid of it somewhere. You can't backwash it, you know. You can't, like what we do with our treatment plants we have now, we backwash the filter. It's kind of like a giant softener. Goes in the sewer, goes to the sewage treatment plant, and they do their thing. No problem. PFAS, no. You can't do that because the sewage treatment plant don't want PFAS because they discharge into the rivers and lakes and streams. They clean it up. They have to filter it out, so they're not doing it. So it's very expensive. So our plan does outline that we believe our most cost-effective long-term solution to this is in this project plan, and that is essentially a couple sections in the township where there's water main extensions to where we could supply water to areas in the township and utilize the assets we currently have that have zero PFAS. We can pump more water on them because we're permitted from the state to do that. We just can't, we don't have the infrastructure to pump that water out. It's kind of like blowing up a balloon that's already full. You have more air, but you can't get it out. So this is, the project plan kind of outlines that. It outlines it very well, as a matter of fact. So, sorry, I wish I had a better answer, but that's
okay,
that's the EPA for you, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Gentlemen?
Yes. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, board. Thank you for public for being here for our public hearing on the 2023 Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Project Plan. Again, my name is Brian Backler. I'm project manager at DLZ. This is Daniel Hong, another project engineer who worked very hard on this project plan. So what is the DWSRF program? If you remember, I was here last year talking about the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. This is the drinking water side of that. It's basically a low interest loan coming from the state that gets paid back. So DWSRF is a national program where Congress allocates a set amount of funds to each state, and the states administer that and audit that on their own in their own internal agencies. For Michigan, that agency is EGLE. And for 2023, the state has allocated $256 million for infrastructure improvements for various communities, and they get ranked and listed according to needs. They have a whole set of scoring systems, and we're actually scored preliminary fairly high in that fundable range, so it's very promising that we will actually get approval for this if we submit this plan and be able to be eligible for those loans. And our goal is to basically be funded in third quarter of 2023. One of the requirements for submitting this plan is to hold a public hearing to meet certain criteria as well. We need to, we're going to be covering the description of the water system needs, the recommended alternative and associated costs.
Right, Ryan, just one quick moment. People are familiar with the idea that when we do a project, sometimes we issue bonds, and the proceeds from the bonds would come into the township, and we'd use that money to do the project. So in this case, we don't have to do that because we're going to borrow the money from the state.
Correct.
And that will create the money to pay for the project.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes, and we'll be getting to a little bit more of the loan specifics as well to see why it's advantageous to go after it through the state, through this program too. Very low interest rate, more than those other bonds or those any other typical loans that you would get for these type of systems. If you look at here, I got a map. This is basically the entire map of Independence Township, all 36 square miles. This shows the water distribution system as it currently stands. It's kind of, forgive me if you're not really going to be able to see my laser pointer, but The water distribution system is concentrated mostly on the southern half of the system. And you can see all the blue dots, various blue dots. Those are all private or municipal wells within the system. So there's quite a few towards the north half, and there's several scattered throughout even the southern portion where we have that existing water distribution system. In particular concern, you got two shaded areas here. These are the areas of the project that we are going to be discussing today. The area around Walden is the main area of concern where we have the PFAS contamination. And then the Parview area there is another section of proposed water mains so that we can bolster the entire system, have enough pressure and capacity to be able to deliver the water quality needs that we have at this new area for this area of concern around Walden. So back to the original problem that we're having here. This is all centers around the Clarkston Gardens wellhead. As Dave talked about earlier, 2018, we began testing in this system, found some concentrations of PFAS. They immediately shut down the well so that we're no longer pumping that through and contaminating the area. It's a real concern because if you get that PFAS in that groundwater, it could leach into their private wells, any of the municipal wells in the area where people draw their drinking water from, and that lets in a possible contamination for, it can potentially affect the health and safety of the residents. So it's an issue, and it was a growing issue that once it's detected, we realized we need to address it. It's a very critical project that we're discussing. Here you can see some more details. These are the various wellhead systems within the township and the associated capture zones. So the really dark orange, that's the 1-year capture zone, and then the light orange is the 5-year, and then the yellow is the 10-year. Basically what this means is that any groundwater in that area, so if you get a rainstorm and that dissipates into the ground, it'll take 1, 5, or 10 years, somewhere in that range, before it finally gets drawn into the well system. So again, you can barely see my pointer, but right there in the middle of the map is basically the well of concern, the Clarkston Gardens wellhead. Here's the blow-up version of that same wellhead. We're just outside that zone, that 5-year or that 1-year zone, right into the 5-year zone. At the top left corner of that is the landfill, Clarkston Road landfill. This hasn't been used since the 70s. But it is a site of possible contamination. It hasn't been fully determined exactly where the source is for the contaminants, so that site should be tested if we want to get to the bottom of exactly where the source of this PFAS is. Other potential sources, as Dave kind of touched on a little bit, fire stations, some of their fire suppression equipment, that foam. Some of those can potentially contain PFAS, some manufacturing facilities, textiles, steel plants, the coatings that they put on there, those can all contain potential PFAS as well. So it's a good idea to look at those industries and those facilities to try to tackle and try to trace down exactly the source of this issue. What we're going to be doing here is basically eliminating taking the residents off those well systems, so we're basically cutting off the issue at the source of the drinking water, and then that gives us time then to investigate and see exactly where this is coming from. But it'll protect the residents and it'll keep those contaminants out of their drinking water.
So how quickly would you call this a plume, or what would you call it?
Well, this is all groundwater we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's everything's in the. I mean, it's just like zones of influence, I guess I would say. So like it's basically showing from when you have at what point you get some rain or some water into the ground, that well is going to draw down from the surrounding area as it pumps through the system. It's going to draw the surrounding area, and there's a set amount of time it's going to take depending on how far away from the well you are, and also various factors like topography, the soil conditions themselves, whether it's a clay or silty, they all have different factors of permeability, and that will play into exactly how quickly that will seep into that system.
So how quickly does this migrate? Presumably it migrates on its own as well.
Well, it migrates through the groundwater itself.
Yeah.
So Well, and part of the problem is we don't know exactly where the source is coming from, so that would lead us to know. If it was right next to it, it could leach immediately. Now, but the further away you get, the longer it's going to take. If let's say we assume or we discover that it is at that landfill, we're looking at roughly about 5 years for it to leach in. But that's been here for a really long time. So it means that this is something that's probably been continuously happening over a long period of time. So if it was a new facility that was put right at that edge there and they started pumping it in, you'd see about 5 years before you start seeing that into that well. So here are some hard numbers to actually look at the measured contaminant levels that we found in that system. I'll primarily just be focusing on the total PFAS down here just to keep things simple, but in 2018, that first chart, we got 10 nanograms per liter that we discovered. And then over the next 2 years, now we shut off the well, we're no longer pumping out of that well, so then that concentration built up. So we reached about 50 in 2 years, 50 nanograms per liter, and it's been kind of steady, goes up and down a little bit every time we test, but it's around that high 40, low 50 range of nanograms per liter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just wanted to just mention real quick, before I just received the test results for May of 2022. Didn't have a chance to update the slide on there, but on the bottom right there where it says it's PFOS, second from the bottom, there's non-detect in June 18, 2021. ND means non-detect, we didn't have it. It's now at 4 from our May 2022 sample. So that bottom number that Brian was just talking about had 4, so we're at 51 on the total.
And if you look at the PFH, the third row down, PFH XS, that is our highest concentrations out of any of the PFAS that we've seen in the system. Now, this is commonly found, like we said, in those fire suppression systems, some manufactured coatings, steel coatings such as that. Some textile factories will also contain that. So it gives us an indication of certain industries or potential point sources to look at. And if you look at, this is a graph of basically the same chart that we saw earlier. That green line corresponds to that PFAS I was just discussing. So it is significantly higher than the rest of the contaminants. Now, if I go back real quick, you'll see that the regulated maximum contaminant level, we are under those numbers for all categories. So we haven't met that maximum, but you absolutely don't want to get that high anyway. Any in the system is a concern. And as Dave has also pointed out, new regulations may be on the rise coming out from Eagle, so we might be even thrown out. They might lower that maximum contamination level. So it's critical. The point is that it's a problem that needs to be addressed. And with that, I'll turn it over to Daniel.
As part of the Eagle requirements for the development of this project plan, we have to look at several alternatives to see what we can do to kind of resolve this issue in the township. The first alternative is an Eagle requirement. It's a no action alternative. And this is specifically looking at really a do nothing type of scenario where you leave the system as is. Obviously, that's not going to be beneficial to the township, and we're not going to pursue that option. The second alternative that we have is the optimum performance of existing facilities. That's something that the township is doing right now, shutting off the Clarkston Gardens well house. But it doesn't necessarily address the PFAS issues long term. Again, the residents are hooked onto the private well systems, and as they keep drawing up water in those systems, as Brian was talking about, you get PFAS coming into those capture zones. Again, township is doing this now, but we wanted to pursue a more effective option at eliminating the PFAS concerns in the township. The third alternative that we looked at was the regional alternatives, and this is an Eagle requirement. In the discussion of alternatives, it's really looking at where can we get a regional source of water to connect to. For example, we looked at a connection to the Great Lakes Water Authority. However, this is extremely cost prohibitive. In a report from 2010-2011, they approximated about $61 million to construct this connection. So that in itself is extremely not feasible, and we are not choosing this option either. The last alternative that we considered is the extension of the existing infrastructure. Again, this is to provide safe, high-quality drinking water for the municipal connections that will be made from those private well residents. We're increasing reliability of the high-quality drinking water, redundancy within the system, and water production. So just a bit of a cost justification for each of these alternatives. As you can see in the top two alternatives, the total cost for the construction and project budget is $0. Again, alternative one is a no action alternative, so there wouldn't be any cost associated with that. Alternative two, we are doing the optimum performance for this township, but there aren't any, I guess, upgrades or improvements that will be constructed. Therefore, there's zero total cost for that construction budget. Again, as I mentioned, the regional alternative will cost $61 million to construct, is completely unfeasible. And alternative 4 has a total project budget of about $5.2 million. So getting a little bit more specific into alternative 4, the alternative that we have chosen for this proposed project, it involves the water main extension along Walden Road. That includes the installation of 6,800 feet of water main within the Clarkston Gardens area. Again, it will provide municipal connections to provide high-quality, safe drinking water for the residents in that area. Supplementary to that is the Parview Drive extension, as Brian and Dave mentioned. It will provide extra capacity from the Bay Court well house to provide the capacity that was missing from the shutting down of the Clarkston Gardens well house. Here's a graphic of the project area that we're looking at. As you can see, it spans from the north and south, from Park Lane Drive all the way down to Walden Road, as well as east and west. There will be several interconnections to other existing water mains in this area so that you have a sense of redundancy to provide reliable drinking water in case something were to happen with any of these connections within the project area. And here is the Parview water main extension. As you can see, we're coming from Andersonville Road north towards Dixie Highway, and as you may notice, there is a bit of an empty spot between the water main, and that's because that's where existing water main currently supplies apartment buildings along Parview Drive. So we'll be connecting to those existing water mains and feeding water from Bay Court, which is in the little park area in the green, and feeding that towards the Walden project area. So in terms of a cost breakdown of the $5.2 million for this proposed project, estimated construction costs, considering all unit prices, unit quantities, comes out to about $4.3 million. Percentages of that go into design fees, construction administration, such as inspections on the job, and other fees such as the project plan itself, all amount to this $5.2 million project budget.
We don't need the bond counsel for this, do we?
No. Oh, yes. Bond counsel?
Do you need the bond counsel for this?
We're DWRSF. It's the same as the clean
Yeah.
water one. We'll need
Yeah,
bond
you
counsel
might- we will
and
need bond counsel.
financial advisor.
Yeah.
We'll need both on there.
We're not issuing bonds, though. We're just borrowing the money from the state.
Well, this is the same program. Is it different than that?
No, it's
CW?
the same.
If it's identical.
It's basically identical
It's
to the
identical,
two.
then we are doing that. Yeah. This is a loan through the state.
Right.
Yeah, through bonds, the sale of bonds.
I see. So that's what I asked earlier.
Yes.
Okay, we are
I'm sorry,
selling bonds.
That's confused, yes. It's exactly the same as the one we did for the sewer project.
Okay, got
It's
it.
the sale of bonds through the state.
Okay. So essentially, gaining the credit of the state,
Correct.
get low interest rates and all that. Okay.
So going into the interest rate savings, again, this is for the low interest rate loan. It'll be estimated at about 1.875% to about 2%. And taking that into consideration, it comes out to an annual principal and interest payment of roughly $313,000 per year. This payment will be funded through the O&M budget, the township's O&M budget, water fund balance, and capital charges. Now, as part of the financial analysis, we considered comparing the DWSRF loan to conventional bond market, which is listed at about 4% interest rate. Comparing the SRF loan, I guess if the township were to go with the SRF loan, be saving upwards of $68,000 when compared to the conventional bond market annually. And that can be seen here. So in the blue is the conventional bond market with the 4% interest rate. In the red is the DWSRF low interest loan. So over the 20-year planning period for this loan, the township will save roughly $1.4 million if they were to pursue it with the low interest rate loan. And speaking on some of the social and environmental impacts with this project, we are not proposing any rate increases specifically due to this DWSRF project. The township is receiving an Oakland County grant in the amount of $100,000, which will help offset some of the costs. And it's really important to note that Eagle wants to prioritize projects that have to deal with PFAS and emerging contaminants. And so with that comes possible loan forgiveness within, I guess, as an extra incentive to go with this DWSRF low interest loan.
Would it be total or partial?
Partial.
Partial.
Looking at the preliminary list right now, there's only a couple projects up on that list that are in the fundable ranges that include PFAS. So we're very hopeful right now. The outlook's looking really good that we'll be eligible for that. There's no hard numbers on that. That won't be determined maybe till third quarter this year after they've finalized that list. But upward, it could be $1 million. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what that is, but we're really prioritizing PFAS, like we said. So there's good cost saving options along with not just aside from doing the loan interest loan, but they'll actually loan forgive a good portion of this, hopefully.
Just to point out, one thing too is that in the state's budget for the DWSRF program, they earmarked $25 million towards PFAS remediation. So they kind of have that set aside on top of the 256, for PFAS, to address PFAS issues through the state. So our understanding that 25 million of this will be used for direct payments to help address certain projects or loan forgiveness. I think they want to go the loan forgiveness route. That's the indication that we got, because it'll go farther and if there's more. But in the fundable range, like Brian just said, there was only 2 projects that I seen on them there for the fiscal year 23 third quarter, and we were one of them.
So will we know about the loan forgiveness before we enter into the final transaction?
Absolutely. Yeah. Talking with DLZ, it's our understanding that we will know before September. And that's before we move forward with anything. We'll know whether we're going to get any or not.
Great.
We're very, confidence is high that we are going to get some kind of loan forgiveness for this, since we're only one of 2 projects that were in the fundable range for this time period to begin with.
In terms of other impacts, there will be minimal traffic impacts during the construction of these projects. And according to a U.S. Fish and Wildlife study, there will be very little effects to endangered and threatened species within the area. So as we've mentioned before, we're looking for third quarter funding. This will give us enough time to prepare draft plans and specifications by January of 2023, as well as submitting final plans by March of 2023. With this schedule, it gives us a construction start date of August 2023 and a completion date of November 2024. Thank you.
Yeah, at this time we'll ask if there's any questions from the public or the board, if you have any
I
additional
will
questions.
start with the board to see if the
Yes.
board has any
Sure.
questions. No?
Sure,
Any-
sure.
Yes.
Hopefully we get the loan forgiveness. The connections, these houses are going to be connected then? Like, it's not optional?
No, it is.
It'll be optional up to
Essentially,
them.
Essentially, in the project plan, Paul, we're going to pre-tap all the properties.
Yes.
So we'll have instead of coming back if they want to connect, then typically, how we have to dig up the road or something like that.
Yep.
When they're putting this in, they're going to put taps right to everybody's property line. There'll be a connection point there if they want to
And they
connect.
can test their water, and if their water's good, they don't have to.
They don't have to.
And if it's not, it's there for them.
Right.
So the other question, this is really, Mr. Supervisor, for you, especially over on Parview,
maybe we should talk to those residents at some time in the next year and let them know this is coming, that maybe they can finally get the push they need to have an SAD for their road paving. Because even though we're gonna do direct boring on this, I assume, right?
Correct.
The-
Much as
The
possible.
boring, we're gonna have a lot of heavy vehicles over there, and those roads are gonna be, I mean, they're terrible now, they'll just be way worse. And I promise you, a lot of folks are gonna come in and it's gonna say it's our fault, because we're putting this in.
Yeah.
But we already know they're bad, so maybe this will be the impetus to get them to do an
Yeah, and
SAD
that's-
for their
and that's
roads
really a good
after this
point.
is done.
That's a real good point. Yeah, timing is critical here, and I think we should really contribute a greater amount of money to encourage these SADs to go forward.
You know, Paul, just to even take that to the next level too, is sanitary sewer would be nice, because there's no sanitary sewer along Parkview either. And there's right next to bodies of water, and there's, you know, typically what happens, and Waterford Hills, nice, it's been around a while, septic tanks begin to fail, they're very expensive, and when they fail, they leach into the ground, the lakes and the streams. You know, there's some things there in communication that we could do with residents up there, you know, if they wanted to do something on the sanitary sewer side of things as well.
Put a sanitary sewer from Andersonville all the way back to Dixie. They could actually dig in the road, and then, you know, we could repair the road after we install the sewer. So.
Big project, worthy project, but
Yeah.
But that would also allow you to stub up into Waterford Hill. There's like 2 or 3 roads that come out onto Parview to allow future sewer expansion that way as well. But definitely along Parview, like I say, almost all those houses on the west side of Parview are lakefront, you know, homes. So I mean, those septics are all, as they fail, they're dumping into the lakes.
Sure.
and there's options to do, you know, least intrusive destruction of property and have or the roads too on the sanitary side of things too, with pressure sewer systems and things like that are a lot less intrusive than opening up, open cut, and putting gravity sewer in there, but
Yeah,
an
don't
excellent point.
let them do an SAD until we get the sewers in.
Right.
'cause
Right.
Is there any
Anybody-
other questions for us or anything?
But yeah, not from the board, but from in the audience, any questions? Anybody online have a question? Hearing none, then I'm going to close the public hearing at this point, and we will be taking this matter up again during the regular agenda for action.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chuck.
All right, now the excitement begins. We are going to have a presentation of the 2021 financial audit by Plant and Moran, the township's auditors. And this will be, the floor will be shared.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And you were right, that was very interesting, so I was actually happy to be able to sit through it.
Great.
And although I love auditing and accounting, I almost feel like the topic is a little boring when it comes compared to
No.
the safety of drinking water. So-
No.
An audit's not easy, and Linda is great to work with, so we really appreciate the effort that you put in, Linda, in helping us get through the audit process. I'm Joe Kowalski. I'm the lead audit partner on the engagement, and with me today is Ashley Fraze, the lead senior manager and really the brains behind the audit, and kind of makes everything happen. We have a couple of documents we're going to go through with you today. The first would be our letter, which is a summary of our audit results, and I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about that. And then Ashley will spend a few minutes walking through a presentation which has some financial highlights, and we'll direct you to look at the financial statements for some discussion on some additional financial highlights that are contained within the statements themselves. So if you could just turn your attention to the letter itself, you'll see that on this first page, there's 3 sections to the letter that are referenced. And so I'll spend a couple of minutes going through each of those. The first of those sections starts immediately on page 2, and that is internal control matters related in an audit. And I'd like to start out by saying, once again, the township did receive a clean opinion on their financial statements. That's the highest level of assurance that you can receive. And that means that as you are reading the financial statements, they can be relied on. While we do our audit, there's a couple of different things that we do. We design our tests to test transactions and balances. And as part of coming up with that design for those tests, we look at the internal controls related to closing the books and preparing financial statements. And so if we were to find any internal controls that didn't work the way they were intended to during the year, we're required to report them to you. We did have that occur this year, and so we're reporting them in this letter. There's 3 items there that are all very similar in nature, but for different areas of the books and records. So the first would be year-end accruals related to revenue and receivables. As we were conducting our audit procedures, there were matters that we discovered as auditors that required adjustment to get the books ready to prepare financial statements. And then the same would be true for both prepaid expenses and the shared county projects. And so just to put a little bit of context on these internal control deficiencies, they're not the type of control deficiencies that would impact any of your budgetary reporting or reports that you get throughout the year. They're the type of control deficiencies that really relate to the preparation of the annual financial statements. And so Linda did work with us to get these prepared correctly, and so they are now correctly prepared with all adjustments recorded in them and a clean opinion on those financial statements. Moving to section 2 of the letter, this is just some of our required communications to you as a board. As the governing body of the township, you have certain responsibilities to oversee. And so one of those responsibilities would be when there are control deficiencies is to have a conversation with management about those deficiencies and what the plan is for correcting them. Our responsibility under auditing standards is to issue our opinion over the financial statements. And when we do that, it's on the financial statements as a whole. So we will talk today about certain matters in the financial statements, and we'll highlight those matters for you. But our opinion is on the statements taken as a whole. And so when we apply that opinion to these statements, the statements taken as a whole are fairly stated. But there are certain items in those financial statements that are significant estimates, and we wanted to point those out to you. And Ashley is going to actually spend a few minutes more talking to you about those, and we do cover them in the letter. Is that in this letter?
The bottom of page 3.
Bottom of page 3, thank you. So if you look at the bottom of page 3, the most sensitive estimates are really your pension and OPEB estimates. And I know that that's a topic near and dear to your heart, and so Ashley will spend a couple of minutes after she gets through her slides, she'll walk you through some schedules that are in the financial statements to talk about those. Just a couple of other required communications. We were able to complete our procedures without any difficulty, without having to alter the procedures or the timing of the work. And we received full cooperation at all time. We had no disagreements with management on any matters related to accounting, and there were no significant findings or issues that were a subject of our retention. So what that basically means is there was no opinion shopping, no pressure put on us to issue a certain opinion. If management were to consult with other accountants about the way to account for things, they would be required to consult with us on that as well. That did not happen to the best of our knowledge. And lastly, there's some other information in your financial statement. So if you read our opinion, you'll see the reference to supplementary information and other information in the report. And it's all very useful information. And our responsibility on that supplementary information is to perform procedures on it if it's related to the financial statements that we are auditing, and read the information for consistency with any of the procedures we performed throughout the audit. So you'll see that we issued an opinion, or an in relation to opinion we call it, on some of that supplementary information, and then other information we say we did not do enough procedures to issue an opinion on it. And those are all standard languages that are included in an auditor's report. And then lastly, I'll just refer you to Section 3. And Section 3 has a number of areas that are of interest to the governing bodies of local units of government in Michigan, including our COVID-19 Resource Center for Governments, which is, there's a link in the letter that you can use. And then some information about the state of Michigan and some of its requirements related to the pension and OPEB assumptions that are required to be reported against under the new public acts. And then at the last couple of pages, we have some new GASB pronouncements that are coming up that will cause Linda to have to do some extra work. And we are standing by to help her with that, but just know that those are coming up for future periods. I will now turn it over to Ashley and let her get to the exciting stuff, which is some of the financial highlights.
Thanks, Joe. So as Joe mentioned, I'll be covering the slide presentation that was distributed to you this evening. If you have any questions, these are just highlights. We can look at the financial statements or any questions during the presentation, so feel free to let me know if you have any questions. So starting on the first slide, or I guess slide number 2, but the first chart in the packet, this presents revenues for each of the past 5 years for all of the township's governmental funds. So this includes all of the revenues for the township except for the water and sewer funds and the retiree health care fund. So starting, I guess, from left to right, you can see property taxes continue to be the township's largest revenue source at about 63%. For 2021. So as you can see with the different bars on the graph, 2019 was the first year of the road millage levy, so that has resulted in increased property taxes since then.
Excuse me, Ashley, I want to see if we can get our IT to get your slides up.
Okay.
Yeah, I did send them a text, but.
They had it, they were aware before I came.
Yeah, they are, I've spoke with them too. Oh, it's saying that you have to put them up on the PC.
I have tried right here with it. They didn't tell me that, they said they had it.
Yeah, I thought they were gonna bring it up for us.
This one.
You sent them to them, didn't you, Ashley?
Yeah.
Yeah. They said the slides are on the PC, you'll have to bring them up, that's what he said. They're located on the PC?
Oh, yes, I see that PDF. Oh, yep, right
Is it
there.
that one right here?
Yep.
Okay, I was gonna
I
say, I
think
can't
so.
read it.
Yes. Yep.
There you go.
I can make it maybe a little bit bigger.
Start the
Actually,
slideshow.
Yeah, up under view.
I don't know if they have the slideshow version or just the PDF version.
Maybe up under view at the top, Ashley?
Yes. Oops. In Zoom.
Full screen, see where it says full screen back on the other side?
I do not.
No?
Yes, full
There you
screen
go.
mode, I'm sorry.
There
Yep.
you go.
Okay,
There you go.
thank you. Okay, so yes, this is the revenue for all the governmental funds. So again, property taxes on the far left there. But I was saying the 2019 was the first year for the road millage levy. So you can see that the trend has been, a jump and then the trend upwards there with the changes in property tax values. So the road millage levy did expire December 31st of 2021, but due to GASB revenue recognition, this will be that last levy will be recognized in period 2022. So the December 1st, 2020 levy is what's reflected in the audited statements here today, and then that December 1st, 2021 levy will be reflected in the 2022 audited financials. The second chunk of columns there is state shared revenue and state grants. Increase a little bit from prior years, but I did want to mention that the 2020 census adjustments is not included in this number. That amount from 2020 and 2021 that I believe has been paid, the adjustment has been paid, but it was in early 2022. So that isn't reflected here just due to the receipt timing of that. So that'll be recognized in 2022, and then the future increases as a result of those census results will be, paid accordingly with those payments from the state for state shared revenue. For licenses and permits and charges for services, you can see that the decrease from 2020 increased again in 2021, given, largely charges for services in the Parks and Rec department, which returned, close to normal for 2021. And then just wanted to mention in the far right, the all other, that did jump quite a bit in 2020. That included $934,000 of federal revenue last year related to the coronavirus relief fund. So given that that was non-recurring, that returned to normal levels this year. You may be wondering, where's the ARPA money? So you received half of the payment in 2021 because it hadn't yet been spent. It's reported as unearned revenue as of December 31st, 2021. And as those dollars are spent, the revenue will be recognized. All right, moving on to expenditures. So again, all of the governmental funds are presented here. Starting on the left, again, the police expenditures increased from 2020. Last year, you saw some reductions as a result of the pandemic. The county, mostly the county sheriff contract, you got a refund as the county received some coronavirus relief money that allowed them to issue a refund for those contracted services. So those returned to normal, and a little bit of increase this year due to some capital outlay. The majority of the fire fund spike you can see in that second column there. There was almost a $1 million additional MERS pension contribution payment that was made in 2021. So that is what makes up the majority of that, and we'll talk about that, as it relates to pension funding in a couple minutes here. So looking at recreation and culture, that it did increase correlating with the increased revenues due to charges for services in those programs returning again in 2021. Public Works, as you can imagine, just given different road projects in the township's portion of those county projects, is kind of all over the board. Last year, there were significant road projects that either ended in early 2021 or, were not really recurring, those cost-sharing projects with the county. So that did decrease this year. There were some safety path expenditures, though, that increased it, a little bit more beyond the 2019 levels. Capital outlay overall, outside of, road public work type capital outlays, decreased from 2020. 2020 did include some fire capital outlays, the truck, and I believe a pumper or two, so that decreased for 2021, and then debt was relatively consistent. The remaining fund balance in all the governmental funds, so when you take all the revenues, on the far right is 2021, so all the revenues for those funds is in the teal, and then in the orange are the expenditures for each year, and then the resulting fund balance at each of the December 31st periods is in the line there. So for 2021, you can see revenues exceeded expenditures, resulted in an increase in fund balance. The remaining fund balance is about $26 million as of December 2021, but this is made up of various restrictions or assignments on uses, so we can take a look at that on the next slide. So again, the components of that $26 million of fund balance, there's different categories and restrictions. So on the far right is the 2021 balances. Starting at the top, that darker blue is non-spendable fund balance. So those are amounts that are not in spendable form. They're still in your fund balance, but think prepaid expenses. It's still in your fund balance, but you can't spend it. So the increase there was prepayment for a fire truck in 2021 related to, that being built and placed in service in a future year. So that increase there. The gold is probably one of the larger fund balance categories. Those are restricted amounts, so those are restricted either legally or by millage or by other third-party restrictions. So the majority of these here are, your police, fire, safety path, and road millage fund balances, because those are specific levies. Those are restricted in nature to be spent in accordance with the millage. And then the orange are amounts that are assigned. So those have been assigned by management for future use. This is just showing intent to use for specific purposes. The different categories are shown in the actual financial statements, but it just shows intent. So it doesn't have to be spent that way, but it's a good way, to show that the township, is planning to use these amounts for certain areas. A component of that is by the board adopting the 2022 budget. There was a use of fund balance revenue or expenditures that exceeded revenues, and so the remaining amount was assigned because there is intent to spend, beyond revenues for 2022. And then lastly is the teal portion. You can see that, so that's unassigned fund balance. So that's the general fund balance that doesn't fit into the other restrictive categories. It was about $1.9 million at December 31st, 2021. So this is that residual fund balance. So a good measure is comparing that kind of remaining amount to your annual expenditures. So that 1.9 million was about 27% of the general fund's expenditures for 2021. So theoretically, what that kind of means and what that measure helps with is, identifying the general fund could operate for about 3 months without any inflows or use of restricted or assigned, fund balance dollars that were in there at December 31st.
Is that a stable amount to have it there?
Yeah, so it depends on the size of the township, and even so you have some assignments that are not always for specific uses, but I think last year you had a COVID reserve, for example, so it's kind of like, you have it outside of your available unassigned fund balance, but it was assigned. So I would say that 27%, I think the states, they don't really issue a threshold, but it's somewhere around like 13% for something that they've issued years ago. But I wouldn't say that that's a concerning fund balance. I think last year it was closer to 40% of your annual expenditures, but again, it depends on your budgeted expenditures for the year too. I'm sure the expenditures were less last year, given the pandemic and everything. All right, so these last couple slides, this is the longer term picture. So again, looking at, this isn't just your governmental funds. So this slide presents the government-wide balances. So this reports long-term assets, which would include capital assets for the township, and long-term liabilities. So debt, pension, and OPEB assets or liabilities. So those aren't presented at the fund level. So this does provide a longer term picture for the township when you look at the government-wide net position, or it's the ending equity balances. So on the far right, again, is 2021. So total government-wide net position, you can see increased from 2020, and the majority of that was in the teal, the bottom unrestricted net position. And we'll talk about this, but a lot of that really was favorable changes in the net OPEB asset and the net pension liability. Those are typically, unrestricted changes. And so we can talk about that funding in a couple minutes, but the majority of that was there. And, as Joe mentioned, with those legacy liabilities being a hot topic for the state and challenges, I guess, for communities statewide, we can talk about the funding levels, but overall that drove the change in the increase in total net position and really unrestricted available net position. The last two slides are the water and sewer funds. So these, are user type charge, business type funds. So operating income is, sometimes a good indicator if your current customers are paying for the full cost of providing those services to those current customers. The water fund, you can see the trend here. Revenues have exceeded operating expenses historically about 575,000 for 2021, consistent with those historical trends. And again, this is just operating wise. This does include depreciation of the system as well. And then the sewer fund, so similarly, you know, the trends for operating expenses versus revenue. So consistent with the past, the expenses for operations did exceed operating revenues for 2021. So while there have been operating losses over time, I know we've covered this when we talk about the sewer fund, you know, in the similar presentation. The sewer fund has about $30 million of net position at December 31st, 2021. A significant amount of that is in the system, so your net investment in capital assets. But you know, as part of the township's annual budget process, you know, including that water and sewer rate evaluation in that, and you know, the longer term picture of rate setting, you know, it's okay if there's an operating loss if that was, you know, the township's plan or, you know, the perspective as you're looking at setting those rates each year and going forward.
Or do you think we need to be more aggressive in the rates?
I don't know. I guess it relates to, you know, your future capital needs in the fund. I can let me look at your net investment in capital assets at the end of 2021 was 20 million for the sewer fund. So I think, you know, if that number starts deteriorating or as assets depreciate, and if you're not investing back into the capital of infrastructure of the sewer fund, you know, you would be a little more concerned. But typically, you know, your depreciation each year, I'm just going to look at the sewer fund on page 21, the depreciation is 1.1 million each year. So that's included in that operating expenses, or I guess loss showing there.
And another key point is that you're continuing to generate cash from operations, and that cash that you're generating from operations is not being fully exhausted on paying for capital items, and which would be borrowings. Mm-hmm. But then that comes back to the harder question, which is how much deferred maintenance, and you know, what's the depreciation rate, and when will you have to start to rebuild, repair, replace components of the system.
So that would require a study of some sort then?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And this last slide, so Joe kind of touched on this, you know, our responsibility as the auditors under professional standards. So the audit of the financial statements, as Joe mentioned, included obviously testing transactions and balances and vouching, but it also includes evaluation of internal controls over financial reporting. Includes expressing an opinion on the fairness of the financial statement. So, you know, we again issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements as they're presented. And then the letter to report our observations to the board is what Joe had covered. So lastly, it's not in the slide presentation, but if you could follow along on page 58 of the financial statements, spend a couple minutes talking about pension and OPEB. So it's like a landscape chart here that kind of shows the trends since the implementation of GASB 68 when the township had to start recognizing the pension liability in the financials. So on the far left is the most recent actuarial valuation or measurement date, which is as of December 31st, 2020. So the third row from the bottom, this shows the funded level at each of those years. So that it was 69% as of December 31st, 2020. So this is, you know, an increase from the 65% from last year, as well as above the state's minimum threshold under PA 202, which is 60%. So a little bit of kind of what's driving the funding increase. So that net investment income of about $1.4 million. So that's, you know, about a 14%. That's a significant return. If you look back at 2019, that was a really good investment return year as well. So, you know, you're seeing those investment returns, those monies that have been contributed are working in the township's favor from putting that money aside perspective. Again, when the 2021 valuation That'll be as of December 2021. So still likely a decent investment income return year. Again, it's subject to fluctuation based on where the market's at today. But overall, you're 69% funded. And then about $1 million that was contributed in 2021 towards this additional contribution is not reflected in this number because of the measurement date from the actuary. So this is as of December 2020. That contribution was made in calendar year 21. So your funding level, I don't know exactly because of actuarial other changes that could happen, but you contributed additional $1 million that will, be reflected in your assets next year. That's not in here yet because of that time lag that, GASB allows for. It's just administratively getting those valuations done.
Actually, I believe Linda will confer that the valuation came out that we're at 75%
Okay.
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the update as of December 2021.
Yeah.
Thank you. And flipping to page 60.
Can I ask you, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, no problem.
If you take that 75% and compare it like statewide, how does that look?
For pension plans, I would say statewide, 75% is still, above that 60% and a well-funded plan. I would say the majority of issues statewide come when it comes to retiree health care, which is not a township issue, which we'll talk about. But for pension, I still think that, that's up in the rankings with other communities as well, well-funded plan. But I think the struggle statewide is retiree health care or OPEB because there is no statutory requirement historically to contribute into those plans, where pension, communities had to contribute that required calculated contribution under statutory rules.
So if I heard the magic words that you used there, so that we have a well-funded plan.
Yeah, yep, I think the 75%, if it's, it's continuing trending upward, of course, where the market's at, you're subject to different market fluctuations, and also changes related to actuarial assumptions. So there's assumptions related to mortality, if people are living longer. That happened actually in 2020. There was different changes in assumptions that results in an increase in the estimated liability, right? That $16 million liability is a big estimate. We audit that, and the actuary, works and looks at the plan assumptions to, estimate that and looking forward. But, as you continue putting money there, that funding percentage will continue to work in your favor in the long term. You're right, like the market fluctuations in the short term aren't always favorable.
Thank you.
I think what you're,
Did you have another question?
I was gonna say, I think what you're getting at too is if we were at the 60% or less funded, then there would have to be like some type of action plan or
Yes.
something to how you're gonna get up to the 60%, which there probably are some communities locally that are in that situation.
Yes, no question about it.
So, not to brag, but.
Right.
I think that's what you're getting at though, is like that's what everybody wants to know, how are we compared to
Exactly.
other people?
Exactly.
And, Independence Township has done very well.
We're doing well.
But we do have a number of key things that we need to watch, like pension liability and some of those things that, other communities have a much higher balance than we do, but, obviously we don't want to let that balance get out of hand, so.
Right.
Sorry.
No, matter of fact, you're hitting exactly on what I was going to say, which is anecdotally, if I had no other piece of information about you as a township, other than you said, we're somewhere between 67 and 75% funded in our pension plan, I would say, well, compared to most of my clients, then that means they must be paying attention to it and taking appropriate action. And so, are there plans funded higher? Yes. Are there plans funded lower? Many.
Yeah.
And so when you're in that range, anecdotally, I would say, you're obviously paying attention to it and doing something right. So continue what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, I can leave the same. So flipping to page 60 as it relates to retiree health care. So again, statewide or, comparing to other communities, this one is more of a challenge The township actually, has a significant pension asset, so even in better shape as it relates to the funding of the retiree health care plan. So again, on the far left column is so this is actually measured as of December 31st, 2021. The plan was 190% funded, so you can see the past 3 years, it's been over 100% funded, but again, with another good year of investment returns, some favorable assumption changes as it relates to premium rates that the actuary took into consideration in estimating that, significant, 190% funded for the retiree healthcare plan. And that is, like I said, something that other communities, very few communities have that funding percentage. The state's percentage for that threshold is 40%. There are even more communities versus pension where, it is more of a challenge because there's never been a requirement to fund that. Historically, the township has obviously, put an interest. The trust was created well before the establishment of the state making it PA 202, bringing it to the issue. When communities are now on the reactive, I think prior to even GASB 75, the township had created a funding vehicle, the trust, for this, and so it's resulted, that proactiveness historically has resulted in the returns and that money being set aside to be in this position today. Any questions on that, or I guess anything else in the financials or the presentation?
Say as part of the audit committee, I guess we always try to get them to say, hey, I want you to say these great things about Independence Township. So they're always tempered about how they say it, so.
I think she went to law school.
There you go.
All right, well, thank you for the time today. As always, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks again for
Thanks
the
for your
opportunity.
hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah,
for the
thanks for all your diligence. I went by that conference room many times, and there was a lot of work being done there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. No action required at this point. Just happy to receive a good report, if I can use that phrase.
Yes.
See you next year. Consent agenda is the next item, and there are 5 paragraphs or 5 subparts of consent agenda. Approval of the board minutes of June 7. We have a June 14, 2022 check run in the amount of $782,064.10. We need to ratify June 10, 2022 payroll in the amount of $306,391.70. And again, we have an external wire in the activity of May in the amount of $444,132.80. So that was item number 2. Item number 3 is the approval of fireworks display permit for Clintonwood Park. Item number 4 is approval of fireworks display permit for Lake Oakland Fireworks Fund American Legion Post. And item number 5 is a request to adopt a resolution for 2022-010 Independence Township Support Emergency Operations Plan, which the fire chief has presented to us. Is there anything that the board would like to move off of the consent agenda and discuss further, or is there a motion to approve items 1 through 5 on the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Anybody in the public? Anybody online still? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved as presented. We're now into regular business, and here members of the public shall have the opportunity to address the Township Board on these items as they arise for 5 minutes. And we've got 3 regular business items. The first is the approval of the distribution system improvements drinking water state revolving fund that was the subject of the public hearing, and we have a resolution to consider for this.
Thank you. This is the final step of the first step of today's program for this DWSRF program, or project plan. Too many acronyms on these things. So this resolution basically just breaks it down as part of the requirements that the township is aware of the problem. We presented the project plan, and we've met all the requirements for the first part of this. I want to point out something that it's really, really important that when I mentioned about PFAS issues, Independence Township Fire Department got rid of that stuff years ago. So I know it might be a question. I just want to make that sure that's on the record. That we don't use it. The fire department hasn't used it since I've been here. It's all gone. We don't use it. They have other things they use. I wanted to point that out because that's important, I think. But the resolution is for the final process for the public hearing.
Yes. And so if you're finished,
Is there any questions for regarding that?
I just want to point out that we have a resolution
Yes.
in the packet materials that is before the board for consideration. And essentially, this is going to set into motion the steps to be taken to pursue this project. We're not spending any money right now. We're not approving anything in particular to be done, but we're saying that we're going to go forward with this, and we're selecting alternative number 4, which is not spending $61 million.
Correct.
Essentially, what is it, $5 million?
Right.
$5 million, and designate Dave McKee as the designated authorized representative for the activities involved in this project.
I've failed to itemize that, so I apologize, but you're absolutely right. Everything you said is correct.
Did I do all right?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
I stepped in the breach.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I left the chief out of my speech earlier.
So, are there any questions of the board on the resolution? Is there anybody in the audience or online? Is there a motion?
Move to adopt the resolution number 2022-011 to approve the final project plan for drinking water system improvements as presented, and authorize the clerk to sign the resolution on behalf of the township.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, the project has been kicked off.
Thank you.
Next item is the request to ratify the International Association of Firefighters, IAFF contract, which would be from January 1, 2021 through December 31, 2026, a 6-year arrangement. And do we want to do some sort of summary of this?
I would like that, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the public would like that, too.
Yeah. Skip, did you want to do a little summary?
He had his head down back there.
Thanks, Mr. Supervisor, board members. I'm Skip Macron. I'm with the Kelly firm. I do labor and employment law for them and prosecution work for some other communities. This particular IAFF contract represents about 2.5 years worth of work. It spanned through the existence of 2 supervisors, 3 fire chiefs, a treasurer, a clerk, 2 finance directors, an HR manager, and a budget analyst in total. And it went through 8 rewrites, basically from the ground up. It was taken with the consideration of the IAFF members, who had a great team of about 8 members that spanned careers from fairly short to fairly long, that had experienced a lot in firefighting, were aware of how a lot of other departments worked. And through the 3 chiefs, we ended up with Chief Pichet, who now has the stewardship of the fire department and got a final look at this thing before it was signed. And that really turned out to be a great thing, because with his work, he was able to look at his experience as a chief and how he could minister the department. The old contract was not imperfect, but it did have a lot of gaps. And these gaps were filled. And a few of the things that occurred in this was we were able to get the concession of the firefighters, which was a very great concession in today's day and age, to discontinue defined benefit pensions. You just had a discussion about a 75% funded pension. That now is set in terms of the number of firefighters that would be entitled to it. New hires would be under a defined contribution, a more traditional, such as a 401k for the average public to think about. They invest their money. When they retire, they have that investment to take with them. If they leave the department, that's fine. As far as leaving the department, as you probably know, one of the things that we looked at very closely was the difficulty in not only recruiting quality candidates who are both firefighters and paramedic trained that can provide long-term service to the department, but to retain them. And it is a competitive world right now. Every fire department, every police department that I'm aware of in the state of Michigan is having a tremendous problem recruiting qualified candidates. And in this case, Independence, I can tell you from dealing with them, at least the negotiating team, you have some real quality people that provide that public safety for the department. So it was really a pleasure, and particularly, Supervisor, you were at the meetings, the clerk was at the meetings, the treasurer was at the meetings. We had a number of trustees called over time to ask about certain aspects that they might have had some questions about, and appreciate that. The firefighters themselves got a raise. That Chief Pichet personally looked at a large number of comparable departments and looked at it from an ability to pay with the generosity of the taxpayers who have given a millage to support fire and emergency medical services within the township. He also counterbalanced that against the plans of the township for capital improvements to make sure equipment was top drawer, that the physical facilities were properly located and correctly maintained and kept up, which is a tough thing to do on a 24-hour house. So all in all, this contract, although no contract, as Mr. Supervisor knows from teaching on these issues, is perfect. Any contract can be the subject of a dispute. But this is probably as close as we could get to where everybody sat around the table. And I may have been misinformed. And if I am, I'll apologize in advance. But my understanding is that every single firefighter paramedic qualified to vote on this contract voted in the affirmative. It wasn't a giveaway. They made a lot of concessions. We converted over certain aspects to paid time off as opposed to sick time and vacation time. It makes it much easier for the department to administer and balance their shifts. We looked at various aspects of seniority. We looked at all kinds of aspects, including just simple definitions, to make sure there was clarity as best there can be. We also, through the assistance of the board and the supervisor that were working on this, and with Chief Pichet agreeing, extended the term of this contract for 2 additional years. That'll give this document the opportunity to actually get a little bit of a workout. And my expectation and hope is that if the Board of Trustees approves it, that it'll lay the groundwork that in the next round of contract negotiations further down the road, there will be some areas that the township and the union can look at and say, okay, what do we need to do? Let's get it done, and we'll have an agreement in short order. We avoided 312 arbitration, we avoided mediation, and these are all good things. And I will tell you, it really was a pleasure to work with everybody from the township and to the IAFF members and to their legal counsel, who I never dealt with but reviewed everything. And we have this product before you. There are some technical corrections that need to be made. Very simple language or text that just in the final draft will be corrected. So this is all but verbatim as to what will be signed. In all, over 70 corrections, additions or changes, upwards of 70, were made in this contract. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them as best I can.
Any questions on the board?
I have a couple.
Paul?
Sure.
The first question, I was curious about the change in the 42-hour employee to a 40-hour employee, and why that change was made from the prior contract. Maybe how it came into place in the first
Well, as far as how the original contract came into place in the first place, 2 fire chiefs ago he was in the union when some of those changes were made, and he could explain them far better than I could. As far as, that's what they work, 40 hours. So we made it 40 hours. We made it
They
simple.
weren't working 42 hours?
They were working 42 hours, now they're working 40. They're
Okay.
designated as a 40-hour employee because they are. They're designated as firefighters because they are. Prior, they were engineers. So there were a lot of nuances to these contracts. And in terms of the hours worked, the pay scales given, everything was adjusted outward from there. Chief can speak to that if you'd like.
Mhm. No, your answer's good.
It's the best I could do.
I understand that. So, but what I looked at was, and again, 2 hours out of 40, I don't know what that percentage is, that's a decrease of that, and that's how that's gonna be done. It's fine. Mike, I'm curious as to why the calculations for their time off and leaves are based on the 42-hour week, if they're not working that anymore.
Chief?
Because those hours are all still being, looks like being calculated at the 42.
We'll let the
Yes,
man
Chief.
who draws,
Yeah, yeah.
draws the lots for the people that work it.
So so all they simply did is they had 20, if you're speaking to the day staff, took the exact same amount of vacation days they had and it just converted over into the 40-hour block. There was no change. We didn't reduce or add any more vacation hours to them. Is that,
Well, but under the prior contract, if you calculate it by hours, and if they had 23 days and we're working 10, the calculations for this new contract are not in days, they're in hours. So if I convert the 23 days to hours, it's being done based on 10.5 hours, not 10. Unless my math is wrong. Because every calculation I did, showed that we were using the total number of hours they would have had on the last contract, not reducing it from 10.5 to 10 per day, and using the 10.5 per day to calculate an hourly number of hours, which is a pretty significant increase if you look at that.
I think the 29 days, off the top of my head, I think it's 303 or 304. Is that, I'm just doing some quick.
I used 20 across the board for the 20-year employee.
Right.
And
All we did is, best way I can explain it is, we kept the days. So it calculates differently, obviously, because we're not using that half hour. So, so it was a 10.5 hour day that they worked
in the past. Right. And they got 23 10.5 hour days of leave.
Correct.
Now they're working 10-hour days,
And they're still gonna get the 23.
but they're getting 10.5 hours of leave per day.
No, it's 20, we're going by the days.
Maybe I did my math wrong.
I don't know, somebody wants to calculate that.
If you could double check it, because
What's the number you
she's
got?
doing the calculation right now, I think.
430 divided by 10.
It's 43.
Yeah, well, well, part of that is their sick time hours, which is 126 hours. You gotta take that off the 430. So I'm just gonna do that calculation.
How many off?
So 126 off the 430 leaves you 304.
Divided by
Divide that by 10.
30.4.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it comes out to 30.4.
It comes out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of assumed I was maybe doing something, I wasn't
That's
calculating
mine.
something right.
Pardon me?
I assumed maybe I wasn't calculating something right.
It may have been the combination of the vacation and the peak sick days.
Yeah.
It was probably combining the two that was confusing. It looked
So,
like we were giving them more.
The other big change in this appears to be that we've greatly reduced or accelerated the maximum time off that folks can get. So we took that from 29 days at 30 years to 29 days at 20 years.
Correct.
And so I guess I assume that was looked at to figure out with that many more days and the number of employees we've got who are in that range of, say, 18 or 17 years, although really it goes all the way back, because we've added an additional spot in there, right? So the prior contract.
Additional spot.
Yeah, well, the prior contract had an increase in days off between you increased at year 6, and the next one didn't come until year 14.
Correct.
The new contract has it increasing at year 5 and 10,
Correct.
and 14, and 17, and 20.
Yep.
So are we comfortable, and I don't know if this is, who looks at that we have the staff to cover all that additional time off that's now going to be available if it's used? And then what was the impact to the budget as we project that out? And because the other piece that it seems to me in the past, when we've gone over a new contract, we had projections that showed the impact of the contract, a budget projection. Does that ring a bell with you, Ron?
Yeah, I could say that's what the part that was missing. Before, they would say, here was the economic impact
Yeah,
of the
what's,
changes in the budget.
I assume that's been run out, but it would be nice to be able to look at that.
It was run out, and I know Rick took a look at everything.
Yeah, it
and
should be in the
reviewed
packet.
all of that, and
I didn't see
concurred that
that.
we were fine financially
Mm-hmm.
throughout to 2026 to execute the contract. And yes, the vacation time was looked at, and we did comparables. We looked at all the comparables of other fire departments, looked at what they were doing with their vacation time, how quick they were accumulating it, and we tried to match up as, best we can, so.
All right. Okay, Chief, I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Supervisor,
Yes.
my other question is, and we did this in the past as well, did we do a projection of the budgets, taking into assumption what's going to probably happen on the other union contract? Because it's pretty normal that whatever's happening with pay increases and other tweaks to benefits, that's gonna be hitting our other contracts. They're gonna be asking for those same type of areas. Do we look at that?
That's
I'm
the
not aware that-
supervisor to me.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
He was asking me.
I was asking the
Yeah, I'm
I'm
not,
sorry.
well, you used to be a supervisor.
I was.
Then I was asking you, I said supervisor, right?
So I'm not aware that we did an apples and apples to the other contracts.
No, they're quite, and in fact, it's apples to grapefruits. This
Yeah.
is a 312 negotiation under para for the non-emergency service contracts. Completely different rules apply in terms of negotiations, mediation, whether or not there is impasse, and what the ultimate contract is. No one ever wants to see those last two steps. Aside from being a former supervisor, I'm also a Merck arbitrator. And I also do fact-finding for Merck in those types of things. No one wants to see anybody go there. But at the end of the day, I can tell you this about this contract. It represents an excellent step forward from where you were. And you've made some great observations in terms of it. And if you were sitting at the table with us when we were negotiating this, a lot of it didn't make sense to us because everybody was coming at it from a different direction. But the calculations that have been made, and not the financial, that's the budget analyst, and he's looked that over. I'll leave that in his bailiwick. Everything that is in this contract was carefully scrutinized throughout the whole time as to what would work better than what we have today, what would benefit the township, and what would benefit the union members to make sure we have quality employees that we can retain. We're not the highest paid fire department around, and we don't have the best benefits, but we're damn good.
Well, I'll rephrase kind of what my question was. I don't think in the time I was a full-time elected official, that we ever gave out raises where the rates differed. I know there's a lot of different parts of that, and when you talk about the payroll piece of it, to me, that's.
And that's a decision that you as a board can make.
Yeah.
If you want parity between public safety and civilian employees in terms of any aspect of contract negotiations, and the board decides that, then that will happen. And quite frankly, speaking as a labor attorney for the township, if you decide otherwise, that will happen.
Right.
Or can happen,
All right.
depending upon what the board ultimately decides. But I assure you, what's said in here, there's probably things that wouldn't even apply in the civilian realm, but under the for what it's worth category, as I said, Chief, everybody put a lot of work into this to get to where we are. But if there's any doubt in your mind, that's why you're a fiduciary, you know what to do.
Well, I know that the time I spent being at those tables, it's just until you've done that, it's impossible to understand how deep you get into things and the length of time that it takes to do it. And so it's kind of hard to sit at this table as a trustee who wasn't at those meetings and have the same knowledge and understanding of what these guys went through and the conversations that took place. Because sometimes it's just one little nuanced thing that changes how something is in a contract, but it's kind of hard to go back now and have somebody explain that to us. So a lot of this is trust that we put in the folks who negotiated it. So
And-
I'm okay with that.
And there's
For
no
me, it
such
was the
thi-
math, so.
And there's no such thing as a stupid question in one of these meetings on this type of contract for board members. Under the fourth category, every question has value. Because if you have the question, other members may have it, members of the public may have it. And just as my wife reminds me, I'm not perfect, we could have made a mistake.
Okay.
Anyone
other-
else?
The financial is in the packet under
Yeah.
page 273,
Yeah.
so I guess I was so engrossed in the reading part, I didn't get to that.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a comment, please.
Yes, Terry?
Just for the public's
Sure.
benefit, because this is going back to January 2021, can you explain why? And can you explain that whatever is voted on, if it's going to be retroactive, so they're going to be getting a chunk of this vacation pay? Can you just explain that for public benefit, please?
The contract expired on December 31st of 2021. It will be retroactive to the expiration date of the old contract. There was a change in the...
20. You were right the first time.
Yeah, okay, thank you. There used to be a rule where it would not go back. The state amended that statute. It is retro. Act 312 itself, in its 45-year history, has only been amended once. That amendment tried to accelerate the arbitration process so that public safety unions would get an answer much quicker than they have in the past. We didn't get there. What we did is started negotiating early, continued forward, kept making forward progress on the ball, and finally got to where we are. So under the for what it's worth category, in a perfect world, if we could have agreed upon this before the expiration of the contract, they would have signed it, they would have been paid. So they're going to be paid now. They get retro pay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I just want people to know that, if they see these spikes or whatever, what it's going to, and
Sure.
that it did take, a year and a half or 2 years to go through this process, that's all.
COVID didn't help.
Yeah.
No.
Right,
No.
right.
It was a complete rewrite.
Well, and just to kind of, I'm not necessarily a recap, but a statement that I think is very important, and Skip touched on a couple of these points. I think two really significant advances were made here. Number one is moving from a defined benefit to defined contribution. That means that people are making their contributions. The township is making a very nice supplement of that, and it's encouraging people to participate in it. And that's going to apply going forward, not necessarily to the people that have been here. So they're grandfathered in, and that's something that firefighters or other employees would never give up because it was so favorable for them. But the fire department and the firefighters agreed to move into this different world of defined contribution, and so that was a major movement forward for this township in that flank. The second thing is that with the chief's guidance on this, looking at all of the other, not all, but many other communities of comparable size and township character, we were near a low end of the compensation. And here the chief is looking out over the Appalachian Mountains saying, where are my people going to come from, and how am I going to stop everybody from running away? And in the meantime, the public is expecting quality service. And so how do you get quality service? You get quality service by being able to recruit good people and retain them. And this contract moves our firefighters into an average range. This isn't the top of the line, this isn't a Cadillac, but at the same time, it isn't anything that's breaking down all the time either. So this is an average range that gives the chief an opportunity to do good recruiting and to retain people. So those two things, to me, are really significant, big picture items that make this a good contract.
If I may say also, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board, I want to compliment again the IAFF third bargaining team, which were all firefighters and some command officers. Completely respectful throughout the process, very thoughtful. Their concern was truly to make sure that they would put together a contract which would continue them to serve the community. And I'll tell you, I was very impressed with them, given the negotiations I have had in the past with other unions. This particular group, very, very outstanding individuals. And in fact, it was very heartening to see some of them, of course, were on duty when we were negotiating. An alarm would tone in, and you could see the seriousness on their face when they were leaving to help a resident or a traveler through the community that needed help. So you're very lucky to have them, in my opinion. As to the contract, the best we could do. If you have no further questions, I'll leave it to your capable hands to decide.
Okay, any other discussion?
One other question.
Yes, sir.
And this goes back to the open enrollment change that was made back in November. And I know there was a lot of conversation at the board about that, and I don't remember the specifics, but I thought that you guys were gonna bring something back to the board that evaluated how that turned out in changing the amount of money that was paid for opt-out insurance when people were opting out of the health insurance. And at that meeting, one of the things that I brought up was that, and for the folks in the public who are listening to this, we pay opt-out money to employees to not take our insurance. And what we have found is that there are instances where they're getting the opt-out money and still being covered under the insurance under their spouse who works at the township. And we've significantly increased that opt-out money with the idea of having more people opt out. And I have not heard how that turned out. But I also felt that it should be in the contract that you can't have the opt-out money and still get covered by the township's insurance. And I didn't see where that was in the contract.
No, I don't believe it is in the contract. However, I don't know that it applies as far as the IFF goes. We do not have two employees in the IFF that both draw from the payment in lieu of, or that get health insurance, so if we put it in the contract, it just doesn't apply. So we can put it in the contract if you'd like, it just doesn't currently apply.
It can be put in the contract?
You want to put it in the contract and I mean, if you
Well,
decline this
That's a board
contract.
decision, but
Right.
in my mind as a taxpayer, I don't want to pay somebody money to not take insurance and have them still covered by the insurance.
I understand, and I just feel like there's 100 what-ifs that we could put in here, but I'm just telling you at this time that doesn't apply to two firefighters.
Thanks, Rachel.
Does
Yep.
Yeah.
it apply to a firefighter whose spouse is not a firefighter? Yes, it does.
But then that
it-
firefighter can then take the insurance, and then the spouse can opt out currently.
I understand that that's how it I guess I've made my point. If the board wants to continue to let that happen, that can be a board decision. But we did say that that was only a one-year deal on that increase and that it had to come back.
Right.
Right.
Right,
So-
so that's dead.
And we did.
That's
an
dead
increase.
unless the township board changes its mind
Oh. So,
heard it.
because I didn't hear,
The track record of
Anything about
that increase was not favorable, and so there's no reason for us to renew
Out
it.
of that payment.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I wasn't aware.
yeah. Okay.
Just one comment from me. I guess I'm glad that the chief negotiated or the group negotiated the extra 2 years in the contract, because since I've been here, it seems like we're approving a contract, and in the next year, we got to start negotiating again, so I guess I'm happy that we had the extra years in the contract, and like you said, we can maybe get some traction on how things are working and before we try to make changes again the next time, so.
Given the fact we couldn't start negotiations immediately, I objected strenuously to that.
Okay. And,
It was
and
a
I
joke
guess,
for the viewing public.
and I guess one of the things I guess I've been in favor of that we worked hard to do all out through the township is to limit defined benefit plans.
Yes.
And, I think it's a major step forward for
Yep.
us. So now we, in essence, it caps what our future liabilities will be. So we can just work on beating that number down and keeping that in a manageable
Right,
arena, so.
right.
Is that gonna have a pretty significant impact on our contribution once we notify MERS that the plan's changing? We kind of expected that would be the case, but.
It's a function of what the actuarial studies show on an annualized basis. It
Yeah.
depends upon what smoothing factor they use. It also depends upon what MERS accumulates in terms of the required contributions. At 75, if you're at 75%, you're leader of the pack right now in many communities throughout
Yeah.
the state of
Right.
Michigan.
I think we're gonna see an increase, but I think that we know that by having this thing closed, and I think that's okay. I mean, we just have to bear down and pay it, but it certainly is worth it to have it end.
You bet.
Just put a million.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for both of you, or all three of you, for contributing to this. And again, thank you to the firefighters for negotiating in good faith with us and being reasonable.
Do you want to ask the public or anybody if they have any questions?
Yeah,
I don't know how many people are left here, but.
right. Is there anybody online that would like to weigh in? Dave McKee, would you like to weigh in?
Good.
Okay. Just for the record, Dave McKee is the only other member of the public that hasn't spoken here today. Is there further discussion, or is there a motion on this contract?
I'm going to move to ratify the International Association of Firefighters labor agreement effective January 1, 2021 through December 31, 2026, as presented.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Not all in favor of approving the contract?
Is it roll call?
Roll call?
Is this roll call?
You certainly can. Clerk
What?
Newbeck, yes.
Okay.
Treasurer Lockren,
Yes.
Trustee Aliaga,
Yes.
Trustee Brown,
Yes.
Trustee Nalamothu,
Yes.
and Trustee Ritchie,
Yes,
Supervisor Fisher.
Yes.
I'm just saying, it says vote roll call. So,
Yeah.
simple majority.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I just saw a simple majority and went from there. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. And Chief, thank you for all of your hard work on this. Really
Thanks, guys.
appreciate it. We can go forward now. Next item on the agenda is request to appoint Township Special Finance Counsel regarding proposed Dixie Highway corridor improvements and request to approve a 2022 budget amendment number 16. As I think everybody on the board will agree, the experience with the Sashabaw corridor improvement was a very favorable one for this township. And in the meantime, Dixie Highway has really historically been a key transportation corridor and commercial center that really hasn't had attention for some period of time. And looking around, there is a material in the packet that points out some of the issues and opportunities that we have along that corridor, among others. And this by no means a total picture of it, but creating walkable sidewalks or safety paths throughout the corridor, increasing communications with the development community there, upgrade commercial areas, and very importantly, that hasn't been discussed a great deal in the past, reinvigorate certain residential areas, particularly in the southeast quadrant of that area. And we have a unique opportunity here now in the sense that the financing for a lot of this can be provided by tax increment financing, which is something that is often, well, in fact, we did that on the Sashabaw corridor through a corridor improvement plan. But if we used a corridor improvement plan on this, as a result of the change in law, nearly all other taxing units could opt out of allowing us to contribute, or allowing us to take their share of the tax increment that occurs as a result of improvements that are done. But I have been able to get a favorable position from Miller Canfield, who is a fairly significant, one of the premier bond councils and finance councils in Michigan. It's an international company, actually, an international law firm, but have their position verbally that they will be willing to put in writing that because our DDA was in place before the law changed on this, on the opting out by other communities, other units, we are likely to be able to capture all the money from all the taxing units in this, which is going to enhance by some magnitude, great magnitude, the amount of money we can capture and utilize for this project. In addition, we had SEMCOG officials visit the township. We worked through the new chairperson of SEMCOG, Chris Barnett, who made contact as a favor to us, and 3 SEMCOG officials came and visited. We took them for a ride in a township van up and down the corridor, pointed out some of the things that needed to be done, and they were very supportive of our position. And why is that significant? I mean, it's only a planning agency, but the point is that SEMCOG is like the gatekeeper of federal funding for things like infrastructure. And so if we can keep them on board and have them come forward with us, that is another very, very promising source of funding. And all of this we need to do based upon reinvigorating our old DDA and undertaking the creation of a new tax increment financing plan under that DDA. And this Miller Canfield Council is very well versed and experienced in this area, and so I would propose to the board that we bring in Stephen Mann of Miller Canfield to help us on this, and his engagement letter is with the packet. It's an hourly rate for initial work. If we go into tax increment financing bonding, then the fee to the firm after this initial work will be taken out of the bond proceeds. So it's a kind of a win-win situation. So I would ask the board to approve this engagement with the attorney, subject to questions and comments of the board.
I have one.
Yeah.
At what amount of money are you supposed to get more than one bid?
Well,
like
I don't.
Instead of just going to the Steve Mann.
Yeah. Well, we don't. I don't think, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't need to do that with professional services. We don't have to. We could, and I can tell you that we were dealing with another firm, probably one of the only other firms that does this sort of thing at a high level, and they didn't have this skill, and it put us behind for almost 2 months because they didn't come forward with their opinion, and so that's why we turned to Miller Canfield on this. And
just for the sake of the process, are they supposed to be written in here that you did solicit from someone else? I'm just trying to follow the rules, and
yeah, I think
I could be wrong, but on a lot of them, it's like, we solicited from X, Y, and Z, and I don't know.
And that happens frequently, there's no doubt about it, with engineering firms and so forth. But for a very special service like this, it's very customary to merely hire one firm, designate one firm like this. Very customary.
And this is kind of like an engineering budget where you're hiring them to go out and maybe put together the ideas and the information to make a decision for a next step. It isn't.
Oh, I understand that, but
Okay.
there's other companies that do the same, and I'm just curious why this is just, all of a sudden, we're hiring this one, and no other one is talked about, that's all.
Well, as I said, I did talk to the other one that was already doing work for us, and that didn't work out. And in my opinion, there isn't another firm that is within this category. There just isn't.
Okay. I just think that should be explained, because you never
Yeah.
know, it looks like pay to play, or this guy's my friend and I want this guy, so I'm just trying
Yeah,
to.
typically in that
yeah.
case, there would be, the purchasing policy says something about, it couldn't be followed because there was no one else, it would just be part of it. We see that, I think, fairly often.
Sure.
That it's a sole source.
Effectively, it's a
So-
sole source.
Right, that would be in there telling us that ahead of time, and telling the public, so they don't question it too.
I think that's what Terry's getting at.
Yeah, I
Should
understand.
just be documented as part of the MAVE, so.
Mhm.
I guess my comment on this too, I was on the planning commission in 2008 when we tried to do some, it was depression time, so we were trying to implement a number of things along Dixie Highway to help those businesses survive and maybe improve themselves to be in better shape to service the people driving up and down Dixie Highway as far as, you know, what can we do? Can we
Right.
change the speed? Can we, you know?
Yeah,
we-
and upgrade the whole
You
community.
know, we tried to come up with a number of different things, and because it was a depression time, there was, virtually nothing got taken advantage of. We had some different things that, like loans and different things, low interest loans and stuff that people could take advantage of, but I don't think, even one, there's only maybe one or two applications, much less, people that took advantage of it, so. So, I mean, it's something that Dixie Highway's needed
Yes.
for many years, not just recently, so.
Yes.
I guess
Oh,
I was just bringing that up, that it's gone back many years that we've looked at this, so.
I think what this is about is great. Don't get me wrong, that I think it's about the project you're doing. I'm just trying to just have it written correctly, like the other things I've seen that have more than one. And only one thing, they just can't put as many lights as on Sashable.
Right.
No more
more
run, no more
airstrips,
runways,
no more
yeah.
runways.
Well, the plan is gonna have to come to the board for approval.
Yeah. Okay.
So just to clarify, so Miller Canfield is the only law firm that can do this?
I think
for us?
at this point, based upon expertise, working on this subject, I would say that it's the only one left.
Yeah, well, I know it's a big law firm. Did you try, I just saying, Clark Hill?
Not Clark Hill.
No.
I don't think they have this, anywhere near the experience with this kind of thing.
Okay.
The only other one that used to is Dickinson and Wright, and we tried to work with them, and they just didn't have the personnel. It wasn't the person, it was, the overall personnel.
Okay. I know Clark Hill is also one of the big ones, but that's what I was asking. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
I think just follow up to that, when we recently did go out for bid with Mr. McKee for bond counsel, they were one of the ones that did bid for his certain project. So I think as well as Dickinson.
Yeah.
So they were the two that I think Dave brought to us that we proceeded forward with. So I know it wasn't exactly for this
Right.
instance, but we have a good feel for who is out there and who is willing to step forward for this type of a thing.
Yeah, and bonding is one thing which is important, and there are only a few firms that do that.
But we also did legal counsel as well.
And this is also DDA and tax increment financing, which is another specialty on top of a specialty. So is there an interest in moving forward by the board?
Sure. I'll move to appoint the Miller Canfield Law Firm as the Township Special Finance Counsel regarding proposed improvements of the Dixie Highway Corridor within the township in accordance with the terms stated in the engagement letter provided by the firm. Authorize the supervisor to accept the engagement as stated and approve 2022 budget amendment number 16 as presented.
I'll support.
Moved and supported. Any other discussion by the board? Any discussion by the public or anybody online? Mr. McKee, you're going to pass? Thank you. Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so. Communications, future agenda items and reports. We've got 5. We've got the Fire Department Monthly Report, May 2022. Report from the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, Monthly Report, May 2022. Report on fiscal 2022 actual to budget comments for period ending May 31, 2022. Minutes in the form of ITAC minutes, final May 10, 2022. And one other set of minutes, the Audit Advisory Committee of March 10, 2022. Any other board member comments? I see no comments, then is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded at 8:10, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. Thank you. That's not too